Back in this relatively short video, I want to make a few large points about psychological treatment in general. Here they are on the board. Let's talk through them in turn. The first one is that some unsupported therapies persist. There's quite a bit of research, quite understandably, on outcomes of therapies. Yet, those therapies that don't seem to have any particular benefit aren't always ignored by practitioners, by clinicians. I believe a good example of this is an eye movement-based therapy called EMDR. EMDR involves thinking about traumatic things from your past in a particular manner while moving your eyes back and forth. It's claims, I think, related to REM sleep. The claim here is that above and beyond just thinking of the traumatic thing you've been through, EMDR will help you. Exposure is a key component of almost any therapy for anxiety disorders. Almost any therapy for anxiety disorders will involve taking whatever makes you anxious and exposing yourself to it. It's kind of an extinction process. If something traumatic has happened to you and it's causing problems for you in some sense, you are probably going to, in almost any therapeutic context, you are going to think about it, you're going to imagine it. But the claims of EMDR go above and beyond that, that there's a benefit not just from thinking about it, but specifically thinking about it while moving your eyes in a particular pattern. That's what EMDR practitioners do. Studies show, however, that compared to a control group of simply thinking about the event or the occurrence, EMDR shows no benefit. So there's no specific benefit, as far as we know, from good research to the eye movements in EMDR. Yet there are people who charge other people money for EMDR training. There are people who specialize in EMDR. This goes back to the idea of my mom and vitamin C. People sell my mom vitamin C for her colds. As far as we know, vitamin C does nothing for colds. If you have a good diet, you take in the vitamin C you need, and your body's all set. If you take horse pills of vitamin C, you just change the chemical composition of your pee. Mom feels better when she takes these pills because she expects to, but research and our understanding of biology strongly suggests that my mom is simply being sold her own expectations. Similarly, if people charge for EMDR above and beyond other kinds of therapy, or they charge for EMDR training, there's no demonstrable benefit to the additional part that's unique to EMDR. It is simply exposure. Not every therapy that gets offered is validated. There is, in our discipline of psychology, there is unfortunately a gap, maybe even a chasm, between clinical training and scientific training. The overall idea is a scientist practitioner, that people who get degrees in psychology and go into clinical or counseling psychology, that they understand research, they understand scientific critical thinking, the steps of the scientific method, peer review, all of these things, and that they use that way of looking at the world, which is the basis for this whole class, as a guide to the therapies they do. But in practice, and I'm not the first person to say this, the American Psychological Society just came out, it's called the Association for Psychological Science now. The Association for Psychological Science just came out with a major article decrying the state of our discipline, saying that there's kind of a rogue group of clinicians who are disconnected from the scientific endeavor, the scientific enterprise, and the scientific method, who are making fairly wild, unsubstantiated claims. Now, clearly there's a professional agreement here, and clearly I have a point of view. But I think anyone would agree that there is a mismatch between the scientists and the clinicians. A person can certainly be both. I think we have people who are that at Normandale Community College, who teach here and who do therapy when they're not teaching here. However, it's fair to say that in terms of therapy, don't assume just because you go to a licensed therapist that you're going to get scientifically validated therapies. Another complicating issue is the general nonspecific benefit. It doesn't seem to matter that much what initials you have after your name, PhD, MD, MA, MSSW, or what mainstream therapy you're trying, or even psychodynamic therapy, which I would not call mainstream in psychology because of the status of Freud's ideas. Therapy tends to help. And maybe it tends to help simply from having a concerned listener who's not your friend, who's not your family member, who will give you advice. Or in the case of humanistic therapy, wait till you give yourself advice. There appears to be, across all various forms of therapy, a general nonspecific benefit. The question is there an additional benefit for certain disorders, for certain kinds of therapy? For instance, for anxiety disorders, is there a benefit above and beyond what I just described, the benefit from talking to someone who's not your friend, who's not your family member, who will give you advice and who will listen? Is there a benefit to cognitive behavioral therapy to treat anxiety? And I believe the answer, if you look at the data, is yes, but it may be that depending on the kind of problem, a certain kind of therapy would be indicated. For instance, borderline personality disorder, notoriously difficult to treat. There has been some success using what's called dialectic behavior therapy for that. The third point is this. The third point is that oftentimes psychological therapy and medication are the best option. If you look at the effect of just medication on its own, and medication is complicated, it may be you have to take into account severity, and it may be, for instance, for depression, that only in severe depression should you give antidepressants, based on the meta-analysis I mentioned recently in another article. But if you do manage to take an estimate of the effect of medication and an estimate of the effect of talk therapy, if you do both, there seems to be more than just the passive adding up. There's something synergistic going on where maybe they have more a multiplicative rather than additive effect. Certainly, in terms of relapse, oftentimes both of these is the best option for preventing a relapse of a disorder or recurrence. A few things to keep in mind then regarding psychological treatment in general. Textbook that I'm going to take the time here in a rather short video to detail for you is a set of factors that predict recovery from mental disorders across most of the disorders. So here are some things that predict that a person may recover from a disorder. Here's one. Self-responsibility. People who seek help voluntarily on their own are more likely to recover from whatever it is for which they are seeking help. Number two, conspicuous causal events. If there is something in a person's history that you can point to that seems to have brought on the trouble, the disorder. The depression started right after the person foreclosed on a house, for instance. Or the generalized anxiety disorder started immediately after someone had a new difficult job. If there's a conspicuous causal event, the odds of recovery are higher. Increased general life adjustment. If a person is better adjusted prior to a disorder or an episode of a disorder compared to other people, then that person is more likely to recover. Age. In general, it's bad news to have relatively early onset of a disorder. People who, for the disorder, have a relatively old, or are relatively old, a relatively late age of onset for the disorder, they are more likely to recover. An acute onset is a good sign. By acute, I mean sudden. A gradual onset is not a good sign. A gradual onset is associated with less chance of recovery. There are some types of symptoms to consider here. One type of symptom, fatigue, anxiety, or psychosomatic, body symptoms related to psychological issues. Fatigue, anxiety, and psychosomatic. Remember, the cell body is the soma, psychosomatic. Those three kinds do tend to result in fairly good recovery. However, the odds of recovery are lower if the person has so-called psychotic symptoms. What do I mean by psychotic symptoms? Across a variety of disorders, the so-called psychotic symptoms, you heard the word psychosis all the time, but in the DSM, psychotic symptoms simply means delusions or hallucinations. Delusions or hallucinations are seen in schizophrenia, of course, but they're also seen in substance intoxication. They're seen in substance withdrawal. They are seen in bipolar disorder. They're seen in quite a few disorders. Those symptoms decreased risk of recovery. So some things do allow you to predict whether someone is likely to recover from a disorder. There are two big ideas to this video lecture. One is the continuum of mental disorders, or the continuum of abnormal experiences, and the other is medical students' disease. The first sort of leads to the second. The idea of the continuum is the idea that experiences people have or behaviors people have that are abnormal are along a scale. Just like I could easily arrange you in terms of height. Height is continuous. I could take everyone in the class and we can arrange them from the person with the least height to the person with the most height, the shortest to the tallest. There is probably, too, a continuum of depressed mood. Here is an individual who experiences no depression, completely neutral. Here is a person who's experiencing depressed mood as strong and pervasive as it can be. Somewhere along this continuum, we impose this category. We say, on this side, this is depression. On this side, this is subclinical. This is not depression. These people would get diagnosed with depression. These people wouldn't. We are moving in abnormal psychology to a more and more continuum-based approach to understanding psychopathology, to understanding abnormal psych. The DSM-5 coming out in 2012 on Axis 2, please see your textbook for the 5 axes of the DSM, will record 5 continua. If the currently proposed changes do go through, there will be 5 dimensions kind of a personality on which people will be rated. But let's return to the idea of depression, this dimension of depression. Completely not depressed, completely depressed. This is severe depression. I'll draw a person here. This is severe depression. Again, I'm a terrible artist, my apologies. This is mild depression. This is subclinical, it's not depressed. These two people have more in common with each other than either one does with this person. But this person would get the diagnosed depression and would have his or her treatment paid for by an insurance company. This person would not. We know from a big meta-analysis, and if you remember, a meta-analysis is a combination of previous studies. Meta means over or and above. It's kind of an above study where it takes whole previously published studies and it treats each previous study as one participant in a great big study. A meta-analysis is a summary of studies. From a meta-analysis that came out recently in the winter of 2010, we know that antidepressant medication seems to be effective above and beyond a placebo for severe depression, but not for moderate and not for mild. And I think where we're headed in the treatment part of psychopathology research is you're going to get a sense for how severe someone's problems are and determine whether the person should get, for instance, antidepressants or perhaps should not. That's the continuum. This kind of breaks down for schizophrenia, which involves delusions and hallucinations, for some disorders with rather unusual things. A delusion is a belief contrary to reality that persists even though someone's giving contradictory evidence. An example would be a woman who's told, you are not pregnant, but continues to believe she's pregnant even though 6 or 7 doctors have said so. That would be a delusion. A hallucination is a sensory perception despite the sensory organ that's relevant to the perception being unstimulated. For instance, you might feel things on your skin even though nothing's touching you and you're awake. Delusions and hallucinations, they're qualitatively different from other people's experiences, and there's probably not as strong a continuum for that. But for most of the disorders, it's probably useful, and this is the cutting edge of research, to think in terms of a continuous approach. The DSM-5 will take that on. Because, as I'll say in class, the disordered are us. By one estimate, 47 or 48% of adults in North America are expected to have a DSM disorder in their lifetime. Because these are human problems, and as far as I can tell, you appear to be human beings, you're going to have a lot in common with what you read about. You're going to be able to empathize and identify. In a class of our size, I'm certain there are quite a few people who have had DSM disorders. Like I say, the cliche is the disordered are us. It's harmful and silly and stupid to hold people with disorders at arm's length and stigmatize them. That said, you are not qualified to make diagnoses of DSM disorders. And this is a good thing. We should all be happy it takes more than watching some of these videos and taking the class. It takes quite a bit of training. I'm qualified for research purposes to make distinctions between, say, bipolar disorder and schizophrenia. I'm not qualified to be a therapist, though. So I want to warn you against what I'm going to call medical students' disease. Beware. Medical students' disease. Don't be like me. When I was an undergraduate taking abnormal psychology in about 1993 at Oberlin College in Ohio, I had an unusual experience that coincided with reading about a particular disorder. Here's the experience. I got up in the morning, I looked in the bathroom mirror, and where my nose should be was a ball of colored light. I could not perceive my nose. Here's a disorder I'd read about. It's called body dysmorphic disorder. It's kind of related to OCD. In fact, I wonder whether I might be moved to the anxiety disorders away from the body or somatoform disorders in the next edition of the DSM that's coming out in 2012. It is a concern about your body's functioning or appearance. It's kind of an obsessive concern. There's a lot of anxiety associated with it. In some way, your body is wrong or hideous, and you may try to hide the body. You may spend a great amount of time trying to see it better to reassure yourself, or you may alter your body. It's not fair to this deceased individual, but every time, well, what's not fair is the way that this deceased individual is portrayed in textbooks. Every time I get an abnormal psychology textbook sent to me, unbidden, unasked for, and I don't know if you know this, but textbooks are often sent unasked for to instructors and professors. That was one reason I think textbook costs are so high. I turn to body dysmorphic disorder in the textbook and I look, is there a picture of a celebrity next to BDD? And I'd say more than 2/3 of the time there's a picture of Michael Jackson. I had just read about BDD, especially how in the most severe form of BDD, body dysmorphic disorder, you can fail to be able to perceive at all the stimulus, or the offending body part, I should say. So, having gotten up, getting ready to shave, looking in the mirror, not seeing my nose, I've never had anything like this before in my life, but seeing a colored ball of light, I freaked out. I ran, well, I put on clothes first, but I ran to the psychology building about 5 minutes away from my dorm. I burst into my advisor's office early in the morning, and I announced breathlessly, I have BDD, I can't see my nose, I'm very concerned, what should I do, I think I have BDD. He calmed me down, and he asked me, all right, Dave, what's going on? When I explained where my nose should be was a ball of glowing light, and I therefore must have BDD, because I must be somehow obsessed with my appearance and my nose, he said, well, try this. Look at your hand. Do you see a ball of light? I did. How big is it? He asked. I said, it's very small. Now look at the wall. I did. I looked at the wall. How big is it? It's very big. He thought for a second and said, I think you're having a migraine. You should go to the clinic. And he was right. It was my first migraine. I had a bad case of medical student's disease. What I fell prey to was the representativeness heuristic from chapter 8. The problem with medical student's disease is that the representativeness heuristic can cause you, as you know, the representativeness heuristic can cause you to ignore base rates. You have an experience similar to what you've read about, and you think, I have this. Try not to have medical student's disease. Try to keep in mind, one, you're not qualified to self-diagnose the way a licensed practitioner is or a researcher is. And number two, keep in mind the base rate. Many of these things are rare. That said, if you or someone you care about during this semester is having problems along the lines of what you see in chapters 15 and 16, feel free to come by my office or contact me. I am not a therapist. If I were a therapist, it would not be ethical of me to do therapy with you or for you, because I'm your teacher, I'm your professor. However, I am hooked into the mental health care system in the metro area, and if you're interested in resources available to you, including the counseling department at Normandale for getting help for yourself or someone else, please come by. This offer exists past this class. As long as I'm at Normandale, you are welcome to ask. I have yet to teach any semester where I don't do this. To put it another way, every semester I've taught since 1999, I've given some kind of referral to some student. So you are not only welcome, you're invited to talk to me about options available regarding disorders and that kind of thing. So, in abnormal psych, the continuum is a powerful idea. We're headed this way in terms of the new DSM on the axis 2. There are 5 axes on which you will place people. Treatments may be soon specified for different severities of, say, depression. And beware medical students' disease, because these are human problems, and I'm pretty sure you're a human. Welcome back. The topic of You will read about the disorder schizophrenia in the portions of your textbook devoted to therapy and to the disorders in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. Schizophrenia is a psychotic disorder because it involves sometimes a break with reality. It can involve delusions and hallucinations, the so-called positive symptoms, too much of something, too much belief, too much perception. It can have bizarre symptoms, disorganized symptoms, very bizarre or disorganized behavior, very bizarre or disorganized speech. It can also have negative symptoms, too little of something. And one particular negative symptom of great interest to researchers and clinicians alike is flat affect. It's worth a quick detour to talk about affect. Affect is your moment-to-moment expression and experience of emotion. It's, if you think of your mood as something that changes over time, like the tide does at a beach, right, over days or months, affect are the little waves in that location. So if you have a mood shift, you're having good and bad feelings and expressions of feelings, and then suddenly you might be down here. You change the baseline. A few metaphors for affect versus mood. If affect is the waves on a beach, movement's all at some baseline, mood is the tide. The tide can come in, the tide can come out. If affect is the weather on a given day, mood is the climate. Mood is the baseline. A mood change is a shift in the baseline for your emotions. Affect is the fluctuation over a day or an hour or a minute. Affect is your experience and expression moment to moment of emotion. Flat affect in schizophrenia is not showing emotion in your face or your voice or your body, especially when talking about very emotional things. It's not only the tone of your voice, it's the posture of your body, it's the expression of your face. An example of this would be someone talking to a researcher, like I was, about hearing voices telling her to set fire to her house, doing it, and endangering the lives of her children. In this particular instance, her children were safe. They were rescued, but feeling worthless and guilty as a result, and not feeling she deserved to live. Horribly painful things to talk about, but in the flat affect symptom of schizophrenia, not showing facial emotion or variation, not showing a change in her body, not showing a change in her voice, very just flatly and somewhat robotically talking about it. That's a symptom. It's a lack of emotional expression and experience. It's not reliably diagnosed. There's a lot of error. There's a lot of inter-rater unreliability. People don't tend to agree when they interview the same person. Does this person have flat affect? Even so, even with that noise in the measurement, it's powerfully predictive. It's usually bad news to have schizophrenia and flat affect compared to having schizophrenia and not having flat affect. I was involved in a research study, and I want you to apply the theories of emotion we've described so far to this study. It involved the IAPS, the International Affective Picture System. These are pictures that have been given to a great many people, pretty good national samples. We know how people tend to respond. If we ask them, are you feeling good or bad emotion? What's your valence? We know. How strong is that emotion? You know, like a Likert scale 1 to 9. We know. We know how people tend to respond to them. We also know that if we startle people with a burst of white noise, and a startling stimulus just has to be sudden. It doesn't have to be loud. So imagine you're wearing headphones and there's a sudden white noise. A startle stimulus. When people are looking at the IAPS, the IAPS pictures that are highly positive, they don't jump that hard when they're startled. We can measure two things about startle. We can measure how quickly after the noise you startle, that's the latency to startle, and we can measure the amplitude. How much electrical activity is there above and below your eye when you blink? If they're looking at a boring picture like a suitcase, in that case, they startle somewhere in the middle. And then if they're looking at something really disturbing, the most disturbing pictures in this collection of pictures are things like, for instance, a baby with a tumor coming out the side of its head that's almost as big as its head. If they're looking at something that creates negative emotion, they startle pretty hard, pretty quickly and pretty hard. So what you have is what I would call the affective modulation of the startle response. Small startle when looking at something positive, like puppies in a basket. Medium startle when you're startled while looking at a suitcase, something neutral. And really high startle when you're looking at something disturbing, like the baby picture I described. Here was the hypothesis. We thought that people, in my research lab, we thought that people with schizophrenia and flat affect would not show this effect. Rather than the stepwise pattern, it would just be flat. They wouldn't really respond in terms of how hard they startled to the stimulus they were seeing. They wouldn't respond, is it a boring slide? Is it a happy slide? Is it a disturbing slide? The independent variable in this research was the valence of the image. Was it positive, neutral, or negative? The dependent variable was the amount of startle. Was it quick? You could measure the latency. Was it big? We could measure the amplitude. And ask yourself, what do you suppose we found? By the way, if this worked, we would have a more reliable way to diagnose flat affect rather than have a bunch of clinicians come up with their impressions, their kind of rating operationalization of flat affect. We could do something in the lab. It could be physiological. What do you think we found? We found that people with flat affect and the symptom schizophrenia compared to people who don't have flat affect but also have schizophrenia, the same pattern. We found the stepwise pattern in people with schizophrenia without flat affect and in people with schizophrenia with it. This strongly suggests that in schizophrenia, flat affect is a breakdown in the expression of emotions, right? In amplification of the startle response, in the expression of emotions, but not in the emotional experience. The people who are showing flat affect still feel things. This kind of physiological approach to investigating the symptom, this physiological, remember the three big domains of operational definitions, this physiological approach lines up with self-report. If you ask people with schizophrenia who have flat affect, what do you think of the slide of a basket full of puppies? They're likely to say, that's wonderful. But they wouldn't say it while smiling. They would say it without showing emotion. So it suggests there's a breakdown between emotional display and emotional experience in people who have this symptom. And that's theoretically very interesting. It doesn't turn out it helps us diagnose the symptom any more reliably, but it does line up with self-report, and it does point out, I think, that one of the theories might do a better job explaining schizophrenia than the other, and in class, I'm likely to ask you which one fits better with this idea that it's the expression of emotion that's impaired, not the experience of emotion. The last theory of emotion is Schachter-Singer theory. In it, there are two big parts or components that more or less go on simultaneously. There is some amount of sympathetic arousal. So first there's a stimulus, and that leads to sympathetic arousal. That determines the intensity of the emotion. How much arousal do you have, and how much of it can you attribute to the thing that you just experienced or are experiencing? The second component in Schachter-Singer is cognitive. It's determined by your appraisal of the world. Is this a good thing or a bad thing you're encountering? What does it mean to you? What experience are you having? Is it good or bad? That determines the valence, the positive or negativeness. That determines the kind of emotion you experience. So in Schachter-Singer's model, degree of emotion intensity is set by degree of arousal and how much you can attribute to your experience. And the kind of emotion determined by what you think about your experience, how you interpret it. And there are obvious implications here for someone who maybe experiences depression, maybe help the person interpret the world in a less threatening way. Some connections I'd like you to make. One, if you're a performer, you should think hard about Schachter-Singer's theory. When primates look at each other, direct eye contact is a threat display. That causes sympathetic arousal. I've mentioned this before on the course. I've talked about professors having something to drink when they lecture. But it also means that when you are in front of other people, whether you are an athlete or a speaker or a musician or an actor, when you're in front of an audience, you're going to experience stronger emotions because you're going to have sympathetic arousal that you will attribute to the situation. The key seems to be, I think, taking that arousal which is going to happen and interpreting it as, I've worked really hard, and now I get to share what I know, what I can do, what I enjoy, what I love with the crowd, and experience it as happiness, contentment, joy, peace even, as opposed to fear, disappointment, humiliation, sorrow. You have to flip the switch and take that arousal and turn it into a positively valenced emotion rather than a negatively one. I think that's the key to performing. It's also why, to this point in my career, I've never taught fully online. I really enjoy face-to-face interactions with students who can look me in the eye for emotional reasons. Another connection I'd like you to make. Schachter and Singer did a famous adrenaline study. They randomly put people in one of two groups. They manipulated what they thought they were getting as a shot. Half the group was told, this is saline. The other half, randomly, was told, this is adrenaline. Everybody got adrenaline. So everyone had adrenaline or norepinephrine in their system. Everyone was going through sympathetic arousal as a result. That's what adrenaline does. However, half the people had a good reason for this. Oh, I just got a shot of adrenaline. The other half didn't. Everyone was told, both groups, go wait in a waiting room. We'll do the study soon. While in the waiting room, there was an actor in the room with the participant. That actor would do things like be very attractive and flirtatious and engaging, trying to elicit one kind of emotion, or may have been really irritating and rambunctious and loud and uncontrolled, trying to elicit another kind of emotion. And by the way, I've always thought it would be really enjoyable to be the irritating actor in this study, to get paid to annoy other people for science. What Schachter and Singer measured was how strong the emotions were of the participants when they were done. They were asked, how much attraction did you feel? How strong was it? Or, was your emotion good or bad and how strong? How much irritation did you feel? How strong was it? And it was the group that had gotten the adrenaline shot, but had been told this is saline, that experienced very strong emotions. Because they took their own physiological arousal, their own fight or flight, and they attributed it to the person in the room, therefore they were having strong emotions. The other group had a much better explanation for this, and they didn't feel strong emotions. So in Schachter and Singer's world, your interpretation of the world determines the kind of emotion you feel, but the amount of physiological arousal determines the intensity. One last connection. Here are members of the psychology department at Normandale at a famous rope bridge in Vancouver. This study is in your textbook, Famous Vancouver Research. This is a scary bridge to cross. I've done it. You look down and it's 300 feet to the ground. In this famous research, an attractive tour guide led, and I believe they did this research on males, led males across the scary rope bridge. And then they measured how likely the tour guide had managed to give a phone number to the participants, how likely the person was to follow up. The control condition, people were randomly put in, they walked the same distance on a completely safe path. No scary rope bridge at all. And so the hypothesis was that the males who had experienced stronger emotions due to the increased sympathetic arousal, right, the scary rope bridge, that they would experience stronger attraction and as a result be more likely to follow up. And that's indeed what the researchers found. So there you have it, Schachter and Singer theory of emotion with its two components. Intensity set by sympathetic arousal. It can be due to adrenaline. It can be due to a height, but as long as it's attributed to the people you're with, social interaction, it becomes emotion. That's the intensity of the emotion. And then interpretation of the valence, good or bad, of what's happening to you. That is the type of emotion you feel. Another big classic theory of emotion is the Cannon-Bard theory of emotion. In this model, you have only two stages. You have appraisal, stage one, and in stage two, two separate things happen. Let's start with appraisal. Appraisal is the same as the James Lange theory. You notice that something's going on in the world. Hey, look, there's a fast, dangerous rodent in the room. You appraise the world, notice something going on. Then, in stage two, two things happen in parallel. They don't affect each other. One thing that happens is you have a feeling. You have an emotion. The other is that you have autonomic, probably sympathetic reactions. You also have skeletal or somatic reactions. Those are the same as in James Lange. That might be trembling, it might be heart racing and creeping up on your desk. But they're separate from each other. Your reactions and your emotion are not the same thing. They are both simultaneous, independent consequences of the same appraisal. So here's the model. See the dangerous thing? That causes you to have autonomic and somatic reactions, but it also causes you to feel emotion that's not the same thing, and they don't influence each other. In a little bit, I'm going to be going over a schizophrenia study I was involved in graduate school, studying the symptom of flat affect, not showing much emotion in schizophrenia. And I want you to ask yourself, which theory we've covered so far, James Lange or Cannon-Bard, fits the schizophrenia results best? You made it to Unit 5. Unit 5 rests on Unit 1, How to Science. It rests on Unit 2, what we've discovered about the processes of perception, memory, and cognition that may make sciencing important. It rests on Unit 3, how biology makes people different from each other, and on Unit 4, how the environment makes people different from each other. I call Unit 5 the disordered are us. The reason I give it this title is that by the best estimate I'm aware of, about half of North American adults are expected to have a DSM disorder in their lifetime. That's a lot of people to hold at arm's length and stigmatize. I think we do as a society do that. It's much better than it was. But I still think that we stigmatize people who have problems. And in doing that, we make them less likely to seek help, and we tend to exacerbate the problems. We tend to make them worse. It's harmful, it's foolish, it's not justifiable. This unit about the problems people have draws on everything that comes before. It's an opportunity to take what you know about research methods, about, say, memory and cognition and perception, about biology, about environmental influences, and answer the questions, how do people have trouble? It's going to be a review of a lot of concepts in Introduction to Psychology applied to the specific question, how do people have difficulty and problems? How can we explain the problems? How can we predict them? How can we help them? But first, we should talk about emotion. The way that psychologists think about emotion is kind of counterintuitive, and many of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders involve emotion. So it's worth putting the emotion chapter in with the two chapters that are explicitly about abnormal psychology. Psychologists don't follow the commonsensical approach to emotion where you see a bear, you become afraid, and that being afraid causes you to shake. Bear, afraid, shake in fear. It's a little different. A few points to keep in mind when thinking about emotion and the three big classic theories of emotion we're going to cover in this chapter. The first point is that appraisal, which is cognition, appraisal, cognition, interpretation of the world is crucially important to these three big theories of emotion. That makes the difference between having a piano recital and going, this was fantastic, I had an incredibly great time playing the piano, I want to do it again, and a similarly strong emotion going, that was humiliating, I never want to play the piano again. It's how you interpret what's happening that matters greatly to the emotion you feel. A second idea is that we have reactions to environmental stimuli. They can be skeletal, right? One hand clapping. They can be somatic, in other words, or they can involve our peripheral nervous system. They can be voluntary motion or the things we can't control. Both are reactions. Both are important. Third, our experience of emotion, our feeling, is separate from those reactions. It's not, in most psychologists' view, see a bear, become afraid, shake. It's some variant on see a bear, shake, notice I'm shaking, interpret it as fear, or if you're Bear Grylls, as excitement. The three theories we're going to go over that involve these crucial parts, interpretation, cognition, appraisal, two kinds of reactions, voluntary and autonomic, and a feeling that's different than those reactions, are the James Lange theory of emotion, the Cannon-Bard theory of emotion, and the Schachter-Singer theory of emotion. In the James Lange theory of emotion, named in part for William James, in your textbook, the father of American psychology, you have three stages. There's appraisal of the world around you. There's noticing that there's a stimulus, something going on, the way a behaviorist might talk about a stimulus. There are two kinds of reactions to that stimulus. There's an autonomic reaction that tends to be sympathetic. There's also a somatic or skeletal reaction that's voluntary motion. Those are separate and they occur at the same time. And then last, there's interpretation. You interpret what you notice you're doing. And that then leads to the experience of emotion, to a feeling, very much not the way a behaviorist would talk about it. Let's go over each of these in turn. The first is appraisal, is what's sometimes called, noticing what's happening in the world. Imagine, in all these examples, that there's a mongoose loose in the room, that there's a dangerous, aggressive rodent running around. Appraisal is a step of seeing that stimulus. The second step, physiological reaction and behavioral reaction, can be divided into what's autonomic, probably sympathetic, and what's skeletal. Let's talk about autonomic first. You go through fight or flight, sympathetic arousal. Your palms get more sweaty, your pupils get huge, your blood goes to your major muscles, your digestion shuts down, that kind of thing. And then using your striated muscle, using your ability to yank your skeleton around voluntarily, you are probably moving away from the stimulus, maybe crawling up onto the desk if it is a threat. Only then, after you have an autonomic reaction and a somatic reaction, do you go to the last phase, which is interpretation. You notice, I'm sweating, my heart's beating faster, and I'm up on the desk. I'm experiencing fear. And in this way, it's not at all bear, become afraid, tremble. It's bear, tremble, notice I'm trembling. Experience that as fear. Interpret your trembling as fear. What this suggests is that you're noticing an interpretation of your own reactions, which occur first, determine your emotion. And different interpretations of your own reactions can lead you to different emotions. You might experience joy during your piano recital because you interpret your physiological arousal that way. Or you might interpret overwhelming fear. The third step is a crucial one in James Lang theory of emotion.